Right, it looks like more folks are coming into the room, which is great because we're just about at 1 o'clock, which is our starting time. Welcome to the C4 Power Hour. If you haven't already introduced yourself in the chat, please go ahead and do so. We're really excited to see who we have joining us this afternoon. And I think we're about ready to go ahead and get started, although I see we do still have some people coming on in. So in a moment, you'll see the clock on your screen go away, and you'll get to see your presenters for today. There we are, and you caught me fixing my hair. So hi, everybody, and welcome to Strategic Thinking for Navigating Change. My name is Valerie Gold, and I'm the Director of Training and Technical Assistance Programs at C4 Innovations. Today's event is the first in a series of free live events that we are calling the C4 Power Hour. Our format will be pretty unstructured, as perhaps you can already tell. We're really fortunate. We have two senior advisors with us today, each of whom has a lot to share about strategic thinking, and we get to ask them pretty much anything we want. So this will be a lot of fun. Several of you have already submitted questions when you registered, and that was wonderful. I would ask that all of you think of questions as we proceed, and please be generous in sharing them in the chat box. I'll work them into our conversation as we move along. We also want to hear your reactions, your thoughts, your expertise, anything you're willing to share, the more the better. Please also use the chat box to let us know if you're having any difficulty with technology. I hope you won't, but if you do, we have a terrific technology team supporting us today. We have Dina St. Loff and Genesis Garcia standing by. They will help you troubleshoot, so just let them know if you need a hand. So I'm really delighted to introduce you to Larry and Laura, two of the people I turn to very often for advice about strategic thinking and strategic planning and all things related to organizational development. I'll tell you just a tiny bit about each of them, and then we'll dive in and start with our questions. So let's start with Larry. Larry has more than 40 years of experience working in state and local behavioral health service delivery, project management, technical assistance, and systems transformation. His experience includes more than 25 years spent managing and leading large federal technical assistance and capacity building projects. He's a faculty member of the Catholic University of America, and he does a lot of consulting with nonprofit organizations, state and local governments, including coaching and training related to system and organizational assessment, process improvement, strategic planning, talent management, and nonprofit governance. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Larry. We also,
all right, thanks, Valerie.
We also have Laura Gillis here. Laura brings more than 30 years of leadership and management experience, primarily in the homeless assistance network and community-based organizations. She is a strategic leader who has expertise in program development, planning, and evaluation. She provides a great deal of consultation on creating strategic plans, setting organizational goals, and securing funding to sustain ongoing programs and expand services. Laura is also an amazing trainer who has developed courses for Johns Hopkins University, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and many others. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
And maybe we could start off with both of you answering the same initial question. Larry, I'm going to ask you first. What can you tell us about strategic thinking and how it relates to strategic planning?
So it's a good question, Valerie. I think part of the reason why that question is so great for us is because it provides an opportunity for people to hear about what they should be looking for in consulting services for the most part around organization development, but also more importantly, what they should be looking at in terms of approaching governance and leadership of organizations. And so succinctly, strategic thinking is really more of a mindset. It's a general way of operating. It enables organizations to really address current and future challenges and opportunities. And so a lot of what Laura and I are going to talk about in terms of some of the stories will be some examples of those challenges and opportunity. So the difference is that strategic planning is really more structured. It typically results in a written plan, lays out the strategies and actions required to achieve longer-term objectives. And so it's kind of going to identify the most important and most impactful issues that you want to address over a 2, 3, or 5 year period. Good planning that is based on strategic thinking, though. And so what feeds a strategic plan is strategic thinking, but strategic thinking extends beyond plans. So it's really an effective way of addressing current, emerging, and unexpected conditions, and not just the longer-term ones, because life happens the way that life happens, and things unfold as we know all too well in today's circumstances that you can't always predict everything. An important part of all of this, and then I'll turn it over to Laura, is that strategic thinking really begins with the ends in mind and ensures that strategies are tied to desired outcomes, impact, and results. And another important aspect of this is that they're consistent with organizational mission to avoid mission creep and keep people really tied to the question of why you do what you do. And it's purposeful, it's intentional, and we'll talk some more about that, I'm sure. Laura?
Yeah. The only thing that I would add to what Larry's already said is that strategic thinking is really a process, as Larry said, but it's intentional and it's rational. And it's looking at critical factors that's going on in your environment to make action plans and goals about where you want to get to. And it happens all the time. It's almost like we're almost in some ways unaware that it's going on, because particularly as leaders in organizations, that's the nature of leading an organization. You are going to be involved in strategic thinking all the time. How many resources, how are we going to use our resources? Do we have the finances to hire this person? Would that give us the best bang for our buck? There's all kinds of ways that we use strategic thinking all the time. A plan is a structure, goals, objectives, and the best plans are ones that are alive, meaning they don't sit on the shelf, that you are going back to them, the board, executive director, the CEO, updating, looking at progress, where we at, and changing them as needed based on strategic thinking. So they're linked in a lot of ways, but one's a process and one's a structure.
That's a really, really helpful distinction. Thank you both for those first responses. And I see as you've been speaking, I took a look at the poll. Folks answered this question as they were coming into the room, and it looks like almost 70% of the people on this call today have been part of a strategic planning process. I hope that if we were to ask the question, have you ever been part of a strategic thinking process, the number would be even higher, since this work is so important. And so with that in mind and thinking about people's roles within organizations, I'd love to hear your thoughts around who sets the strategic direction in nonprofit organizations and what different roles people play in strategic thinking. Laura, why don't you go ahead first, and then Larry, if you'd like to chime in, that'd be great.
Yeah.
In nonprofit organizations, it's usually the role of the board of directors for strategic thinking, along with the executive director or CEO, whatever that title is for that particular organization. And usually senior managers, depending on how large the organization is and who's there, they'll be also setting that strategic direction. But I think it's also very important for the leaders in an organization, particularly the CEO and executive director, to include managers, supervisors, and everyone in the organization in strategic thinking. And that could happen in staff meetings, regular staff meetings, where you set aside time to talk about where are we going, and always tying that back to what is our mission, what are our values, and how does that play out?
Thanks, Laura.
I think Laura hit the key points. Part of one of the things that she said is really important, that the tone is set at the top, and that leadership sets the example. But leadership also, if it's effective in terms of setting strategic direction, kind of cultivates an environment in which it's contagious and that it's spread throughout. You never know where you get ideas from that are really big and important ideas. I think the other important point that she made that I agree with wholeheartedly is it's an inclusive process, and it's not just the board, it's not just the senior leadership, but to the extent that you can make it a contagious part of the culture of the organization, but also extend outside of the organization for the relevant inputs and perspectives and data even that would allow folks to make really critical strategic decisions about any kind of challenges that they're facing or opportunities that they might be able to take advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
So Larry, you mentioned data. What can you share about the role of data in strategic decision-making and strategic thinking overall?
Well, it's kind of an interesting balance because in addition, one of the things that you hear people talk about a lot with respect to strategic thinking is that it really should be rational in orientation. But rational in orientation means that you not only follow logic, but you also look for objective data to help you. But I will also add that you want to take it as an opportunity to be expansive in your thinking and be creative. And so it balances the kind of the rational with the creative. But it needs to be data-driven and to the extent that you can, evidence-informed. And so if there's a body of science, a body of data that really provides objective information about approaches and how you actually go about doing business, you want to draw upon that as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I want to add on to that something else. I think sometimes when we hear the word data, we think of numbers. And I also think that there's a lot of value in the information that we glean about from partners, from trends that are going on, and the other information sources that we can use. The staff that are working directly with the program participants, that's all really important information. The people that we're serving, that is data that really informs client satisfaction surveys, focus groups. That sort of data gives you more information about how people perceive your services and what strategic directions that they think you should take. And it's so important to get that kind of information from the people who are providing the services and the people that are getting those services.
And Valerie, I wanted to add why that's so important is that, if you think of a sphere as 360 degrees, but you only look at one side of it, you may look at the dark side of the moon, to quote Pink Floyd. But if you really want to see all that there is to an issue, you really have to look at it comprehensively. And that does mean getting information from the perspectives and the information sources that kind of feed you that picture. And so being strategic not only means that you come up with good conclusions and actions, but it also means that you're strategic about what information you get, how you synthesize and analyze that information as well.
You know what, Larry, I want to add something onto that, and it's like strategically, who do you talk to? I remember one strategic planning process that I was in. We purposely went and talked to our funders. And there was a strategic reason for that. One is that we wanted to know what, we wanted input from them. But we also wanted them to know that we were thinking strategically and that we were involved in this because quite frankly, we wanted them to have a good impression of us. And so that was a strategic decision that we made as far as including funders and some of our partners that we might not have included if we hadn't been thinking in that direction. And this was at a time when an organization that I was in, that we were an organization that had been around for about 15 years, and we were really getting to a point where we were sustaining ourselves fairly well, and we were really trying to look for where was our next growth going. Mm-hmm. And so it was an important point to understand the funding, what's going on in the funding world, and to get that input, like foundations and things like that.
And that's a good example of doing what I call looking down the road and around the corner.
Exactly.
So all of this sounds so great. At the same time, and I think everybody on this call knows this, folks who are working within health and human service organizations, especially right now, have so much that they're facing in terms of changes in the service environment, meeting the needs of the people that they serve, meeting the needs of their staff, coping with challenges and threats to funding, to operations, needing to pivot and change course in reaction to so many different things. How do you balance sort of the aspiration to be strategic in your thinking and in your work with the need to respond to everything that's happening around you all the time? Larry, maybe you want to take this one first.
I can give a general response, but also give an example that it's the balancing between being disciplined and flexible, that you want to make sure that to the extent that you have a routine covered, that the basics are covered, that you don't sway from that. But these times really kind of call for a lot of flexibility. And so part of the whole notion of having a strategic mindset is that you're nimble. One example that comes to mind is from my time on a board some years ago. I joined a board of an organization in D.C. called Instilling, and it's really now very renowned. And in 2007, I joined the board. What most people forget is that that's actually when the recession began. We didn't note it until the next year. We had big eyes for expanding, and we had a whole, part of our strategic plan was this really elaborate expansion. But when the throes of the recession really hit us, we did what everyone else did. We hunkered down, we cut spending, we became more conservative in what our expansion opportunities were. And so we survived. And much like Laura said, we kind of were able to sustain ourselves. But what eventually happened is at the same time, another local organization could not survive, and we had an opportunity to take over the services and the clients and actually a piece of property that they had. And so we went about a very deliberate process of due diligence for about a little less than a year, and eventually adopted that. And that actually ended up becoming a growth opportunity out of it. And so one of the things I would say to kind of use that as an example is that you do what you need to kind of make sure you build a house that withstands the big bad wolf. But you also take the opportunity to answer the door when opportunity knocks. And that, I think that's what happened in our case. And it ended up becoming really a much better, it was serendipity. It became a much better opportunity for us to grow and expand. And I think since then, they've added, programs above and beyond that. The challenge that I think a lot of organizations are facing now is that if they didn't have some of those fundamentals in place, there's a bit more of a threat. And so one of the reasons why, there's a saying that I heard when the recession was going on, that the worst mistakes are made when times are good, because that's your opportunity to actually shore things up and to make sure you have the fundamentals in place. But most of the organizations that we've been dealing with, either through C4 or other venues, have been really trying to make that pivot, and it's a hard pivot to make. What you look for are opportunities that will exist beyond this and things that you have to do just to adjust for these circumstances. And Laura, you might have some specific examples of that.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of food for thought in that. But I'm also looking at the chat box. I'm going to answer, Valerie, but I'm also looking at the chat box. I'm really interested, all of you, what are some of the issues that you're dealing with right now? I mean, April talked about COVID-19, which of course we all are, but are there other specific challenges that we could address or questions that you have? That would be great. I wanted to say that in response to your question, Valerie, about what I heard was, there's just so much coming at particularly people who are leading organizations all the time. There's so much to do, and so how can you do strategic thinking, and how can you deal with COVID-19 and everything that's going on right now? I've learned, I've had the opportunity in my life to work in not-for-profits, to work in the public sector, and to work for a for-profit company, all in leadership roles. And what I've learned over the years is that leaders have to, meaning the leaders of the organization, have to set aside time to talk and to think strategically. I mean, as a group. My last time that I was with the leadership group for a for-profit company, we had a sacred meeting on Fridays for 90 minutes that leadership team always met together. And we set aside time to talk about strategies so that we weren't just getting engulfed in human resource issues or the finance, where we're going to go for the, all that sort of stuff, so that we would have time to really think strategically about where is this company going and what do we want to achieve given our mission and our goals. And sometimes it's like, but what can I do? Because a lot of us, we're also running projects. We're also doing trainings like this. I mean, we were in, online meeting rooms like this, or we were flying out to do a 2-day conference and things like that, or run policy academies. But regardless, it's like, that's your role. People in the rest of the organization look to you because that's the pail of water that you're holding. And that's your role in that organization to do it. And so that sometimes I think it's really important as leaders, and this is a little sideline, but I just think you have to delegate off other work so that you have the mindset and the time to think, because people are depending upon you to do it. Quite frankly, it's their paychecks that are depending on you to do it oftentimes. So it's important. And so I just think that it's that discipline that Larry was talking about, that balance of discipline and flexibility that's so important.
Thank you, Laura. Now, each of you have started to reference some of the different organizations that you've worked with over the years, and I'd love to hear a little bit about how the strategic challenges and opportunities differ or vary depending on where an organization is in its own development. Laura, you look like you want to go first here.
Well, Larry and I, in preparation for this call today, Larry and I, met and we talked. And Larry, I'm going to pop this one back over to you because I have a developmental. I'm a nurse by profession, so I think about organizations from a developmental perspective of like infants, young adults, and older, as far as like how they are developing. And Larry's got another way to think about it, which I think is intriguing. So Larry, why don't you, and then I'll pop back. Do you mind?
Well, the truth is I have a degree in human development, so it actually is fairly similar.
I didn't know that. Great.
So I think, Valerie, a lot of the work that I've been doing with nonprofits today, I've been discerning distinctions between where they fall along the line of 3 areas, whether they're in the viable, sustainable, or thriving stage. And so when you're looking at organizations that are kind of trying to establish a viable package, it's really more of the startup, the foundational pieces, making sure that they have adequate, governance procedures in place and a perspective, trying to form identity around mission, vision, values, those sorts of basic pieces, putting together financial packages that will allow them to stand up. And so it's sort of like being able to get up, just at least upright as an organization. With a number of organizations that we've been dealing with, they are kind of in a different stage, which is more in sustainability, and they're trying to look for how do we actually make sure we're in an enduring state where we've got the funding that will endure us over time, that we have sophisticated enough operational and governance packages together that will do it. But then there's a third group, and I can give an example of this, is that these are the organizations that really, I think some of the comments I'm looking at in the chat box are speaking to this. They're the groups that are well established, they're sustained, but mostly what they're looking at is how do we thrive and grow. And I think as we were thinking about doing this session, we were looking at how do you thrive and grow in good times and bad. Because just because times are not great doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity to grow. And so these are the organizations that are looking at how do they actually expand their reach, their impact, their reputation, evolve governance and operations. And there's an organization in D.C., Martha's Table, that I looked at last year, and they were situated in a neighborhood that had become highly gentrified along the 14th Street corridor, anyone who knows D.C., and become Restaurant Row. They serve, as Martha's Table implies, food services and services to, people who are in the lower socioeconomic group, and the community is a large part of what they do. They made a fundamental shift in terms of strategically, in terms of their mission, to move to a place-based operation. And they determined that it was more important for them to be where their clients were than to be uptown in a nice neighborhood. So there was a cascade of effects. They ended up they had a nice piece of property that was worth some money, so they could cash in on that. They targeted their mission more focused, in a more focused way. They shifted and moved from Northwest D.C. to Southeast D.C., which was, across town and over the river, basically. And they made a lot of these really fundamental shifts in who they were and how they operated. They were already a thriving organization, but what they essentially did is that they refined it. And I think, as Laura said earlier, these were the really tough conversations, because it wasn't just a slam dunk decision that they made. The board, the staff, all had to really be in concert on it. But these were the conversations that took place in the boardroom, with staff, with stakeholders, funders. Everyone was involved in this, and most certainly the neighborhood. And it was really a way of gathering information that allowed them to figure out, okay, at this stage of our development, we really need to be here in Southeast versus in Northwest. But it wasn't just a matter of geography that was the difference. It was a matter of the importance of where their services could have the greatest impact and reach.
Yeah. I love that example, Larry. The other thing, too, about it is that when I hear you talk about that, what I hear is that this organization was really operating out of their values. Mm-hmm. That this was aligning their values and their mission with where they physically were going to be. It's impressive, and I think it says a lot to anybody who would want to fund them, or who wants to be a partner with them, or who wants to, go to, be a part of their services.
But it also was the way that they thought about pretty much every topic. I was on a committee that selected them as a nonprofit board, mm-hmm. and they won the award last year. And what we find with these high-functioning organizations is that their boards, their governance are pretty much on par. And regardless of the challenge that we throw at them in terms of questions, they really have this thoughtfulness about how they approach everything. And it keeps coming back to exactly what you said. How does it reflect their values? How does it help them achieve their mission? How does it mm-hmm. help them have the impact to achieve the ends that they ultimately want to have? And mm-hmm. they don't hold on to something simply because that's the way they've been doing it all along. They adapt and they make change without it being like, constantly going back and forth. They make a very deliberate thought. They have a very deliberate thought process in terms of how they go about it.
Mhm. That's cool.
Laura, I'm going to throw something at you, because this is something that we talked about. You had a really good example of an organization that really had made an intentional decision to not grow. Can you talk about that? I don't want to steal your job, yeah. Laurie, but I thought this was a really good story that Laura had to share.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the story I told you, Larry. No,
I think you were. It was a Baltimore story, an organization in Baltimore. You all decided not to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, so part of my volunteer work is I work for, I don't work, I'm a volunteer. I volunteer on the board of the Friends of Herringbone Parks, which is a city park in Baltimore City, and it's a Friends group, not-for-profit. Our mission is to promote, restore the park for current and future generations. And we made a strategic decision. We did some strategic planning about a year ago, and we made the decision that we didn't want to grow to be really, really big, that we wanted to stay small. And that given that we were going to really foster people to work and to do things in the park and partner with them without us taking on a lot of the administrative burden of hiring a lot of full-time people, because we are a small group. Our budget literally is $40,000 a year. And so, but it was a strategic decision to stay like that so that we could remain flexible and that we could move quickly. So we do a lot of advocacy work with the city, but we also do a lot of programming, and we promote other people's programming through our network, through our membership, and through our listservs.
Thanks, Laura. That's great, and I think that actually provides a really nice segue into one of the questions that has come in from a participant in today's event who has been really fortunate to have a donor provide money to support expansion, and it sounds like expansion at a pretty significant scale. Here's a road that this is enough to double their services and impact, but is rightly concerned about how do you do that in a way that is sustainable moving forward with so much uncertainty around future funding. Laura, why don't you take a stab at that, and then Larry, if you want to chime in, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. I'm just reading what's written here. How to grow in the current economic uncertainty. Well, you know, Winston Churchill said that never let a crisis go to waste, right? And so, and when there's a lot of uncertainty, what happens with humans is that we tend to like focus in and everything purple kind of goes away. We can focus in on what's happening. So donors provide enough money to expand our program, essentially to double our services and impact. But how do we grow in a way that's sustainable, manageable, not too much too soon? Okay. Well, one of my questions in my mind is there any strings with that donor? Meaning they provided the money, are they expecting something in return? And did you all promise anything that now you're on the hook to provide? So that's my first thing I think about when I see that. Oh, thank you for typing in. You can tell me, yay, we can communicate. I guess what I would do, no strings, I just want to know what's going to help others. Great. Well, I think what your best thing to do is to, when you're ever reworking a strategic plan, is to open up and collect information. And this kind of goes back to what we were saying before. I think you need to talk with the staff who are providing services and find out from them and from the people that you're serving. If you were going to double your services, what would you do? For instance, are there subpopulations that you're not serving right now that you should be serving, or that you could be serving, or that could use your services? Are there geographic locations that you're currently not in, that you could be in, that would have value for the people that are there as well as value to your organization? That's a couple of things that I think off the top of my head. Larry, what's generating for you when you read this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just jotted down some notes. So one of the things that we really recommend that organizations do is develop what we refer to as sustainability plans, particularly when and if you have time-limited money. The great thing about getting that money is that it kind of kicks the can down the road to the extent that it gives you time to kind of put that plan into place, to take a look at your resource development, your strategic partnerships that you have that will be necessary to continue those services after after the money expires. This is typical of grant funds, and it could certainly be typical of organizations that receive one-time only funding. The other thing is, I think, to be a bit more methodical in terms of scaling staff and making decisions about, and this is a conversation, Valerie, I'm thinking about the organization you and I are working with now, thinking about the extent to which you really need to add staff, or you can bring on people on an on-call basis, or create partnerships and linkages with other organizations that you can kind of, to some extent, either outsource those, looking for opportunities for volunteers to pick up some of the slack after things are over in internships. But there are a number of different ways, and so it's really about what's feasible, what's possible. And there's more typing, so we'll see what if there's another component to this. But I think sustainability plans really do call for how do you grow and sustain yourselves over time, and they really focus a lot on resource development. One thing we haven't talked about is boards, and since I spent a lot of time talking about boards, it's really important to take a look at the extent to which the board is involved in strategic direction overall, because that is a major part of what a board's role is. They are really strategic leaders by nature, and the extent to which they're involved in raising funds. And I've been a part of organizations that have had boards be significantly involved in raising significant amounts of money. And those unrestricted dollars are the best kind of dollars to have. And they're the things that kind of keep the big bad wolf at bay, but they also are the things that will allow you to grow and expand exponentially over time. The answer is yes. Okay. They have to hire new staff and expand geographically.
Okay. Those were all great, Larry. I would also just add, and I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce your name. I'm going to try. Is it Tirza? Yay! Okay, great. Thank you, Tirza.
Good.
I wanted to say your name, and I was pronunciation is not my strong suit, just saying. But thank you. The two things I wanted to add. One about increasing staff in uncertainty. One of the things that, in fact, C4 does. I used to be part of the leadership at C4 before I stepped down and started doing other things. And one of the things that we created some years ago is what we call part-time on call. And this enables C4, and it's people that are employed by C4. They don't receive any benefits. But it enables us to have a cadre of folks who have very specific skill sets that we can pull in as needed to do specific work. They tend to be folks that have been around for a while, meaning they're farther along in their careers, but enables us to expand and contract our labor as needed. And it's been a great way for us to sustain sometimes when there's uncertainty, because the people who are part-time on call, they're not relying on C4 to pay their bills every month. It's an extra. So that's one thing to think about. And then the other is that I was going to say is when you said that you're hiring new staff, is that I love to hire utility players. And it's a baseball analogy. I like baseball. But it's basically that somebody that can play third base, second base, and outfield. Someone that can do a variety of things in your organization. I learned that years ago when I was working in a fairly qualified health center as the clinical director at Healthcare for the Homeless. And we hired someone who knew, this was during the HIV epidemic, we hired somebody that's what the HIV health education. And they didn't have skill sets to do other things. So when some funding dried up, we had to end up laying them off because we were unable to move them into other places in the organization because funding streams come and go. So having utility players that you can hire, and people obviously have a lot of skill sets, and they're going to hopefully develop more in your organization. But that's something also to consider when you're hiring people and when you're looking at talent to bring into your organization.
I'm going to echo that.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Larry.
I'm just going to echo that point because I can't support that notion anymore because one of the things I remember one of my teams, we talked about this, about what made people successful in our team, and it's exactly what Laura just talked about. It was the resourcefulness that people brought to the table, that they were not, one-trick ponies, that they could kind of expand beyond just doing that one thing. And that's a strategic decision that as a hiring manager you're making, that you're looking for people who may be a bit of a unicorn, but they can cover a number of bases. I'll come up with a football analogy later, Laura, and throw you.
I love the unicorn, Larry. That was great.
It's always about, at this point into a conversation, when the metaphors start flying fast and loose. So
yes, exactly.
Let's keep those coming. But Tirza, I think we all want to thank you for that question. It really provides an opportunity to think about so many different components of strategic thinking, and it also really, so much of what I'm hearing from Laura and Larry really highlights that importance of sort of the balance of, discipline and flexibility that Larry introduced a little bit earlier.
So you ready for my football analogy, though?
So much of this is about. No, not yet. I'm just kidding. Go ahead with it, and then I want to shift gears a little bit because I have a couple questions about strategic planning. But all right, let's hear the first one.
So here's the football analogy, and you actually stepped right into it when you reframed the thought about discipline and flexibility. So when every team is preparing for a game, they have a pretty well set playlist. But for most teams, the quarterback steps to the line of scrimmage and has the ability to call what they refer to as an audible. They look at how the defense is set, and at that moment they decide they're prepared for the play that we just called. And so they step back from the line, and they'll call what they refer to an audible. It basically tells everybody on the offense, I'm changing the play at the line of scrimmage. So be prepared and flex. And that really is, I think, the position that we're in today with COVID. We all are calling audibles, not just in March, but every day. And I think that's the challenge that everyone is facing today.
Yeah. Good analogy.
So that is a good analogy.
So you got it, Laura?
It is so true.
I know you don't like football that much, but.
That's okay.
It also, it brings to mind a little bit of, Laura, what you were saying earlier in terms of how important it is to gather information from frontline workers, from people being served, from others in the community. Of course, when you grow, if you're only growing sort of in the same direction you've been going in, doing the same things, just doing them more, you're going to miss some opportunities. And so one of the wonderful opportunities that comes with an unrestricted gift is the opportunity to step back and do some assessment. Next month, I have to put in a quick plug, we're going to do a conversation like this with a couple of experts on rapid assessment, which is more important now than ever, really. How do we look and see what are the current community needs? What are the current community assets and potential partners and resources we could leverage to deepen our impact and to achieve our mission? So So this is all really, really important. And I do want to spend a couple minutes talking about strategic planning because I know we had a few questions that came in before today's event, and I see Susan has added one. So I'm going to create sort of a composite question for you. First part, when is the right time to begin a strategic planning process? How do you know when it's time? And then part two is, what do you think is the right length of time for a strategic plan nowadays? Who wants to take this first? All right,
I'm
then
good.
It looks like
Yeah.
Larry.
Yeah. So the answer to all of those questions is it depends. So for instance, if you're a brand new organization, it doesn't always make sense. And I know the tradition is to do 3 to 5 year plans. It doesn't always make sense to do these really long plans because a lot of the foundational work that you need to do, let's go back to Laura's analogy of human development. Well, the growth spurt in that first 18 months or so is very rapid. The amount of work that you have to put into getting up and just standing up an organization is tremendous. And so it starts from conception in terms of what you think you want to do and shaping out mission, vision, and values and doing all the, due diligence pieces to stand up an organization. Beyond that, typically, though, I would say I would tend to err on the side of having a shorter plan of about 18 months for new organizations. And then I think enduring organizations, they usually run 2, 3 to 5 years in nature. And, plans really are cyclical. You begin working on one before one expires because the issues that may be popping up in the next 3 years are different from the issues that took place over the previous 3 years.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you, Larry. And I was thinking again about that organization that I was talking about earlier that I volunteer in, which is a very small organization. Our first strategic plan that we did was after we had been around for about 2 years because we were getting our 501c3. We were recruiting for the board. We didn't even have staff when we did our first strategic plan. It was just the board members getting together saying, okay, for a Saturday with a volunteer community member, because we didn't have any money to hire a facilitator, doing our first strategic plan. Recently, Valerie and I just worked with an organization, a national organization, who was going to do strategic planning. And I think initially, when we started working with them late winter of 2019, their intention was to do a three-year plan. Then COVID hit. And what happened was they said, nope, we're going to just do a 2-year plan. There's so much uncertainty in the environment right now. And this is an organization that's been around for 25 years. But they felt like, and they have very specific things that they want to accomplish. But they felt like right now, given the uncertainty, let's just do a 2-year plan. Let's try to accomplish those goals, those objectives, and then we'll look again because we'll have more clarity later. And I thought that was a really smart move to go that route.
I agree. So I just put a note in the chat box for folks who are joining us today that we have time to take sort of 1 or 2 more questions about specific situations that you're facing or challenges that are on your mind. So as you're thinking about what you might want to ask, I have another question that came in a little bit earlier that I think is really important. So when folks entered the room today, it looked like the majority of people joining us for this event have had some experience with strategic planning. And that can range, right, from being really deeply involved with some of the conversations to maybe attending one meeting where a SWOT analysis was conducted. I'd love to hear from you, Laura and Larry, about how you can make sure that people served and frontline workers are included in meaningful ways in strategic planning.
Yeah, I had I had a wonderful opportunity to work at Healthcare for the Homeless of Maryland here in Baltimore years ago. And when we started doing strategic planning, we were at the time serving over 100 people a day, people experiencing homelessness. And this was a federally qualified health center. And I was part of the leadership team. I was a clinical director. There was a strategic planning group that worked together. It was the board president, a couple other board members, the CEO of the organization, myself as the clinical director, and a couple other folks. We wanted input from the staff, and we wanted input from the clients that we were serving. So what we did is that we created, the staff voted 2 people to be on the strategic planning group, and we had a consumer advisory board, which is very popular in those days, a CAB, and we had members from that group that were on this this body that was deliberating the strategic plan. So we had representation. But the other thing that we did that I thought was even neater, I mean, that was great, is we had brown bag lunches once every couple weeks where people would just, bring their lunch together at work, and we would have people talk. This was the staff members, and the strategic planning group would set them down. Hey, we're thinking about this. What do you think about this direction? And have them chew on it, mull on it, tell us what they thought about it. Do you think this would work given where you are sitting in the organization? And these were different teams of mental health providers, addiction providers, primary care workers, different folks like that, outreach workers. And then the other thing is that we did focus groups with the clients and asked them, what do you see as the best services that we're giving? What do you think we should be doing differently? And things like that. All of that was data that was collected, which is, we talked about the importance of data before, but all of that was so important to get that perspective, like Larry talked about earlier, that 360-degree, look, to get that perspective from the different folks. The other thing, too, that's so important, we had buy-in. These were our key stakeholders, and we had buy-in from them when that plan was rolled out so that we could go to implementation and say, remember, we all talked about this. This is what we're doing.
Thank you. Those are great ideas and great examples. And you're right. The plan becomes really just a dead document if you don't have that buy-in. And so working towards that from the beginning makes so much sense.
Yep.
Larry, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I also want to ask you if you can respond to the question that Pamela raised in the chat, which is how can new board members navigate the challenges that are already existing in an effort to move the strategic planning goals along?
Yeah, I think Laura covered some of this, and I'll just add to it a bit. I think it's really about the process. There's a lot involved in the process that you can do to ensure that the goals are realistic. That's one of the questions that someone asked. And how do you actually make a strategic plan a living document? And I think this is a conversation that kind of extends on one that you and I had earlier this morning, Valerie, about the ability to ensure that the process is inclusive, that you want people to own the plan, that everyone stays informed, that the measures are clear and objective, and so as a result of that, you can kind of have an idea. And so one of the things that people can do is to make sure that there are tools in place to indicate when things should be happening on the strategic plan, that those dates, those measures are built into, if they are items that reflect board responsibility, that they're reflected in board meetings, that they're reflected in staff meetings and management team meetings, and so that those objectives don't get lost, that they stay on the radar. I think for new board members who come on, and how do they actually deal with, part of the reason why we're talking about strategic thinking and strategic planning is that strategic thinking allows you to deal with those issues as they pop up, whereas strategic planning allows you to think, kind of far down the road and to address those longer-term goals and objectives. And one does not forsake the other. They really do complement one another because you have the day-to-day activity and the kind of issues that pop up on a regular basis. And so I think that's a little bit of kind of some of it. It's really the discipline of the process, making sure that it's inclusive, that you have a way to keep track of it, that people are well informed, as Laura said, as well, in terms of where we are in terms of progress on the plan.
Yeah, I think those are all excellent. I would just add, too, that when new board members come on and there's a strategic planning already in place, it should be part of their orientation so that they understand, how did this get here? What are the problems now? Where's the progress that we're at right now? Because the board should be looking at your strategic plan at least quarterly and be getting updates from the senior staff about what's going on so the strategic plan stays alive and well and not something that's sitting over on the shelf somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And so that everybody's aware of their role.
Exactly.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I really want to thank everybody for coming today, and I have a couple of things I want to go over before I turn things back over to Laura and to Larry for their parting words of wisdom, and we adjourn for the day. So first off, I'm hoping you all have noticed that there's a little box on your screen that says resources to download. And if you go into that box and click on the document called Organizational Development, you'll see that it's a great list of resources that Laura and Larry put together that I think is well worth giving a gander, and some of those may be really valuable to you. I also want to ask that you all take a moment when we finish today's event to complete the feedback survey that's going to pop up on your screen. This is our first ever Power Hour, so we're really counting on you to let us know what you liked, what could be better, so that we can really make the most of this opportunity to connect with people and share great ideas about organizational development. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, in September we'll be having our second Power Hour that will be focused on rapid assessment, a very, very timely and important and fascinating topic. The date for that event is Wednesday, September 23rd from 2 to 3. And if you select the box to sign on for our mailing list that will come around to you with the survey, then we can make sure that you get the details about that event. Oh, and look at that. Bina has also pasted a link to the registration page right into the chat box. Thank you, Bina. So with that, I would now like to turn things over to first Laura and then Larry. Each of you will have about a minute to wrap up and leave us with your key takeaways. Feel free to throw in a sports analogy if you must, but that's not required. Thank you. Laura, go ahead. What do you want to leave us with?
So I immediately went to basketball, but I'm not going to go there, okay? I just wanted to leave you with this thought because we all know this is challenging times for our organizations and for us personally, because with COVID-19, we really don't know what the future holds. I mean, we have a sense, but we don't know when there's going to be a vaccine. We don't know what's going to happen. So it's a challenging time in general for all of us. One of the, and in challenging times, that's when we as humans become anxious and we become overwhelmed. And so oftentimes we retreat into our comfort zones. And as I mentioned earlier, don't let a good crisis go to waste. This is also an opportunity. And as leaders in the organization, for those of you that are, who have the opportunity to supervise other staff, to lead the organization, to manage programs and to be managing people, this is the time too when your first task is to foster a positive work environment for self-worth, optimism, and pride. It's part of the organizational culture, because that's what's going to get all of us through together. So, we really need that psychological space to be able to do the effective strategic thinking that's so necessary. So that's my take home.
I'm inspired.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, me too. All right, Larry, see what you can do.
Well, mine is really quick. I think the takeaways that I'd like people to walk away with today is stay focused on ends and mission. Always keep in mind why you do what you do. We get wrapped up into the what and the how, but the beginning question starts with why. What's the purpose? Adopt a strategy and a strategic mindset and culture. So make it a part of just how you do business, how you think and approach policy and operations with that mindset. And most importantly, be inclusive. The perspectives that are required to really get at the bottom of issues really calls for that level of inclusivity. It also means that if you want strategy to be implemented, people need to take ownership of it. And the best way for folks to take ownership of it is to be a part of developing the strategy and developing the solution.
So true.
So, and thank you guys for joining us today too, by the way.
Yes, and thank you for the questions. It was great.
All right, well, so There we have it then. We're going to stay focused on our mission. We're going to stay focused on taking care of our teams when now more than ever it's so important. And we're going to get through this and thrive. Thank you so much, everybody. Please stick around for a minute as the survey is about to pop up, and we really want to know what you think. Bye.